This is a republic, if you can keep it, with Mark Brewer and Jeff Timmer.
I'm Jeff Timmer.
And I'm Mark Brewer. Welcome to the 2025, it seemed like a decade, episode of A Republic If You Can Keep It. This is our last episode for the year. We'll take a 1-week break for the holidays, and Jeff and I will be back for 2026 on January 8th.
This podcast is now on YouTube. You can find the link to our YouTube channel on our website, arepublicpodcast.com. Subscribe to the channel and never miss an episode. We're recording on Christmas Eve, and even as we await the arrival of Santa, there is a lot on our radar along with Santa's sleigh. The Justice Department is dipping into the National Black Toner Cartridge Strategic Reserve as it redacts tens of thousands of pages of the Epstein files. Even so, the scandal continues to grow in a way not seen maybe in presidential history.
That's right, Jeff. Even tech challenge Mark Brewer can redact better than the Department of Justice. But also, as part of this ongoing scandal, Larry Nassar, the disgraced one-time MSU sports doctor, now may be part of the scandal. A note allegedly from Epstein celebrates their shared perverted interest with the president in vulnerable teenage girls. The FBI says the letter is a fake, but we all know that Kash Patel would never tell a lie.
And neither would Trump.
These newly released files also show Trump was an Epstein Frequent Flyer, after he has been saying for months that he never flew on Lolita Airlines.
Attorneys general are increasingly in the political bullseye. Democrats in the U.S. House might be joined by some Republicans to impeach Pam Bondi over the Epstein files debacle, even as Bondi continues to fail in efforts to indict New York AG Leticia James and other Trump enemies he wants her to persecute.
And here in Michigan, State House Republicans are mulling over an attempt to impeach Attorney General Dana Nessel, something that would be totally symbolic, but make MAGA Republicans feel good about our very successful Attorney General who has litigated time and again against Trump over the last year.
The Trump Republican MAGA movement may need to go into group therapy and couples therapy after an unhinged verbal brawl broke out during the Turning Point USA conference this past weekend. We'll be joined later in the podcast by Politico senior writer Adam Wren, who's been covering groups like Turning Point, the MAGA movement, and what's going on in the Republican Party.
The next key political battle in Michigan will be a special election for control of the state Senate. The primary for replacing now Congresswoman Kristen McDonald-Rivet in Senate District 35 is set for February 3rd, with a May special general election to follow. It's a swing district that will determine control of the state Senate next year.
CBS News has gone from the gold standard for broadcast news to the toilet with Trump-favorable censorship of 60 Minutes. Murrow, Cronkite, Severide et al. Are spinning in their graves, and the very much alive Katie Couric calls it a disgrace.
First, it was the Donald Trump Institute for Peace, then the Kennedy Center, Trump saving accounts, Trump $1 coins. Now Trump has decided that an entire class of battleships will bear his name, and he'll play a role in designing them because he says, quote, "I'm a very aesthetic person." Is the world's first gold-plated Navy fleet in our future?
This battleship idea sounds like Trump has reached the Hitler moving imaginary armies around on a map of Europe stage of his presidency. But Trump has also raised the possibility, and I'm sure he's very serious about this, of awarding himself a $1 billion settlement from the lawsuit he's filed against the government he runs.
You know, I brought a lawsuit, and I'm winning the lawsuit. There's only one problem. I'm the one that has to settle it. In other words, I am suing, and I'm the one that's supposed to settle it. So maybe I'll give myself $1 billion and give it all to charity. Does that make sense? Donald Trump sues the United States of America. Donald Trump becomes president, and now Donald Trump has to settle the suit. I hereby give myself $1 billion Actually, maybe I shouldn't give it to charity. Maybe I should keep the money.
In effect, Trump is setting himself up to be judge, jury, and beneficiary. Why stop at $1 billion? Why not $1 trillion or $1 gazillion? Of course, he'll say the tariffs will cover the check.
Jeff, why don't we start with a post-mortem on the year's most bizarre political chain of events? And as the title of our episode indicates, it seems like a decade as we reflect back on what has happened since January of this year, starting with Doge, right? And Musk, with Trump's initial blessing, just savaging, dismantling the federal government till they had a falling out. But sadly, the federal government and all of us citizens are still suffering from that mayhem that we saw last spring. And we have all the election results over the years consistently showing a swing toward Democrats, even in districts that Democrats didn't win, and up and down the ballot too, Jeff. Local races, minor, obscure statewide races in states like Georgia all show a definite Democratic swing. We have the Republican Congress fracturing, right? People quitting. Stefanik, Marjorie Taylor Greene. It looks like increasingly tenuous hold by the Speaker on his Republican House. And as Debbie Dingell told us last week, we may be looking at government by discharge petition. So there's a lot of stuff that has happened over the year, and I just touched on less than 1% of it in those comments.
Yeah, as I think back over the year, I guess the thought that comes to mind is, holy shit, there was just so much. And you're right, the Doge, the wrecking ball that Trump came into this second term, this whole performative bullshittery of Elon Musk and Doge and how they're taking this green eye shades and business sense to the federal government. All they did was break things and increase costs. Doge cost the United States taxpayers money, didn't save taxpayers a single penny, cost billions of dollars in rehiring people that were illegally fired, trying to fix the things that they had just broken with their sheer incompetence and hubris that they knew what they were doing, not to mention the lawlessness, the access of these civilians, unqualified access to sensitive taxpayer personal data of U.S. citizens, businesses, defense secrets, treasury information, you name it. That data could exist now in multiple forms and copies all over private servers. When you look back at the years of outrage that still last to this day in much of the Republican Party about Hillary Clinton's private email server to do official Secretary of State work during the Obama administration, that's like a child's game, a quaint little snafu compared to what these folks deliberately did with the entirety of the federal government and all its data and all its employees and all its payment, income, and expenditures. And really, I think it's symbolic of all of Trump's presidency, the last 10 years, Trump's entire 80 years of life, is how he's never actually built anything, despite this myth he's created about himself as a builder, a designer, an architect. This, as you said, he's really into aesthetics. Yeah. Look at any picture of Trump's residences and now the Oval Office that he's turned into this garish bordello looking, Liberace threw up on Louis the 13th kind of palaces with fake chintz. I mean, Donald Trump's whole life is the somebody who doesn't understand wealth, power, taste, class, what he thinks it would look like. It's the Jethro Bodine of the billionaire class is Donald Trump. And that's just where, that's like January 1st now. So now on January 22nd, 2025, I've got some time to go here. And since this is happening, like, with Festivus Eve, this is my airing of grievances here. Tomorrow I'll be performing the feats of strength as Jerry Stiller laid out and back on the Seinfeld show. But it really did set up this whole year of let's break things for the sake of breaking them, with this economic illiteracy of the tariffs and trade wars that have disrupted the entire global economy, not to the benefit of the United States, not to the benefit of United States workers, taxpayers, manufacturers, importers. The United States citizens and businesses are the ones who pay the tariffs. And all Trump has done is tax United States businesses and consumers billions of dollars, push the economy into this recessionary danger zone. One of the things they did was fire all the professional leadership at the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. And then this fall, surprisingly, they delay all kinds of unemployment, inflation data, GDP data. Yesterday, miraculously, they come out with long delayed second quarter GDP growth that, surprise, shows results. I'll put those in quotation marks, results of 4.3% economic growth in the second quarter. No one with any sense of credulity would believe this. You can't trust what they broke now. That was what made the Bureau of Labor and Statistics work, was its autonomy, the fact that markets in the US and across the world could rely on the data being non-political, non-partisan. There wasn't a thumb on the scale. And now Trump has completely broken that, saying, I'm going to put my thumb on the scale and we're going to see better numbers. And surprise, we see better numbers. We're going to see like 400 million people working in the United States with a population of 330 million. We're going to see drug prices down 3,000%. You just go into all day after day since January 20th, however many days ago that was. We've seen the same shit, different day, just takes on a different form. It's incompetence. It's no intention of actually governing, no desire to govern. It's all about Trump and his kids and those in his orbit trying to enrich themselves and empower themselves and perpetuate themselves beyond Trump's presidency, whether or not he even tries to run for a third term. And given the way he didn't or tried violently to not leave his first term, I think we can expect that ultimately Trump is going to take with him as much as he can, because, at his advanced age and his feeble decline that we're so able to witness over the last 10 years, as Trump becomes more frail and even more cognitively disassociated with reality, it's only a matter of time until he finds himself planted on one of his golf courses. And his goal is to take as much of the federal treasury and maybe our national treasures, the copies of the Declaration of Independence and Constitution and things that he has hanging in the Oval Office. He's made it clear that he now looks at the White House and the presidency, he doesn't see himself as a temporary occupant. He sees himself that he is turning it all into his image, which is so different than any other previous president has ever tried to do. That's just one of Trump's failings, but it's symbolic of the Trump presidency. It's all about him. It's never about the country. It's never about us. It's never about doing what's right. It's never about actually making the economy better or the country safer. None of that. It's all about what makes Trump feel good in the moment and get richer for the long run.
Well, Jeff, I absolutely great description of one aspect or many aspects of what happened last year. I want to focus in a little bit on the economic damage to us here in Michigan, just for a moment. I mean, clearly the tariffs are hurting the economy. We've had the autos talk about, literally billions of dollars of costs imposed on them, which have cut their profits. And as you and I have mentioned before, I think we're going to see big profit sharing cuts, in the what the workers are going to get next year and their profit sharing checks. We've seen, the plans of the auto companies in Michigan change dramatically, abandoning billions of dollars in capital because of Trump's changes in policy. We've seen economic development projects in the state halted because of Trump's arbitrary changes in policy. The healthcare subsidies are about to disappear. That's going to hurt hundreds of thousands of Michiganians. And as Debbie Dingle reminded us last week, raise healthcare costs for all of us, probably lead to the closing of rural hospitals and just raise costs in general for those hospitals. Inflation hasn't gone down. Jobs are hard to find. I mean, it's really had a very detrimental impact economically just on us here in Michigan, let alone the national destruction that we've seen from this modern day robber baron. Jim, I also want to touch on another ominous development this week, which is what the new leader at CBS, I think it's Barry Weiss, did when she pulled down a segment of 60 Minutes critical of the president. Thankfully, our friends in Canada later released it, so we got to see what she tried to hide. But also, I understand that now the FCC has been able to install basically an internal monitor at CBS. And this appears to be part of a broader effort started last spring, right? Went after Jimmy Fallon and other hosts of late night TV, try to censor and clamp down on the media in this country. Another clear symbol of authoritarianism. This is exactly what authoritarians like Putin and Orban and others have done historically, through their ministers of propaganda or disinformation, whatever they call them, try to control the media either by buying it outright or installing censors and getting these companies, these media outlets of all types, to bow to their will and only broadcast the capital T truth as they see it. What do you think of these developments, Jeff?
The developments at CBS should be chilling to all Americans. The right, the Republicans love to act like aggrieved and they've been wronged and are being targeted when you compare them to fascists, when you compare what is happening in the U.S. to 1930s Germany. But if the brown shirt fits, we should call it out. And in this case, it does. CBS voluntarily allows the White House monitor to come in and give the thumbs up or thumbs down to their content. That is an anathema to the concept of a free press and free speech and watching and reporting on what the government does. The government exists to protect the rights of the citizens, not the other way around. The power comes from the citizenry and is given to the government. Only that power that there are needed to protect the welfare of the people, to protect the country. That is the concept of how the U.S. was founded, and that this Republican Party under Trump is traditional, Republican, conservative, limited government in any way is complete fiction, myth, propaganda, because all they have done, there has been a greater escalation of presidential power under Donald Trump, a suppression of all other power, the legislative power, judicial power, has diminished. We have a ruler, not a chief executive who is answerable to the people. He clearly sees us as his subjects, the Congress and judiciary as his henchmen. The Congress is very willing. The Republicans in the U.S. House and Senate are very willing to self-neuter themselves, turn over their equipment to Donald Trump to keep in a jar, and abdicate their role and responsibility. And we see the judiciary doing a lot of the same. The two or three, the two being Thomas and Alito, who can always be counted on to side against the United States and the Constitution, are joined quite frequently by Neil Gorsuch from Colorado, as happened yesterday, a ruling that actually temporarily limits Trump. Those three justices refused, and actually two of them issued a dissent. One refused to sign on to the majority opinion. But it shows that the judiciary, at least from the Supreme Court level, and they're working on, going down to the lower court and making that over in Trump's image, are trying to set up an imperial style presidency, which has long been a criticism of the 20th century expansion of presidential powers, going back to FDR and maybe even before. Trump has taken any previous attempts by presidents to expand their power and made those all look like child's play in retrospect. And this should be alarming. This whole CBS thing, we're going to see it replicated in other news organizations. Trump's Larry Ellison gives a lot of money to Donald Trump affiliated PACs and causes and candidates. And wow, Trump's FCC clears the way for mergers. They're looking to buy CNN, control the media, control the microphones, control what people think. It's 1984 meets 1930s Germany. And it's not, can it happen here? It is happening here. It has happened here to a great extent. The only question remains, what are we going to do about it? And I'm very bullish on 2026, despite what I expect to be previously unseen levels of federal interference across the country, trying to alter and suppress and control the election in a way that yields the outcomes to keep Republicans in control of the U.S. House and U.S. Senate. That's what we can expect from Trump. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Thereth ends my airing of grievances.
The tradition of Festivus begins with the airing of grievances. I got a lot of problems with you people.
The presenting sponsor of A Republic If You Can Keep It is Epic MRA, measuring the pulse of Michigan for more than 4 decades.
When most of us think about polling, the focus is on those campaign polls telling us which candidates are winning. But the most important polls are for businesses, local governments, and nonprofits assessing the needs and wants of their customers or constituencies.
Those are polls that guide policies and lead to institutional success. Those polls have to get it right, which makes the choice of a public opinion research firm critical. Epic MRA has been trusted for more than 4 decades to get it right. Our clients have included school boards, statewide nonprofits, corporations, as well as the candidates and news media who rely on us during political campaigns. Whether it's just a couple of questions or a full in-depth survey, we are here and ready to help.
You can reach us at epicmra.com.
Adam Wren is a national political correspondent for Politico, based in the Midwest. He is a contributor to Politico Magazine, Playbook, and West Wing Playbook, focusing on Donald Trump's remaking of the federal government and the Democratic response to his return to power, ahead of what could be a very wide-open 2028 presidential contest.
Wren previously served as national politics features correspondent at Business Insider. He's also written for the New York Times and Washington Post. Originally from Ohio, Adam graduated from Indiana Wesleyan University and has a master's from Northwestern University's prestigious Medill School of Journalism. Adam Wren of Politico, thank you for joining us on A Republic If You Can Keep It. We've talked a lot over the years. It's great to see you face to face and have you on the podcast. It was kind of a wild year, and next year portends to be, 2025 on steroids. Where do you think we've come this year? Where do we find ourselves as we're looking ahead toward 2026? And set the context and narrative for where you see the national political world going here in the United States as we enter this pivotal midterm election year.
It's been a remarkable year. Still, in some ways haven't caught my breath from the presidential transition that happened earlier this year. I mean, I kind of tend to think through the year and in the stories that I've covered and scoops. And, my work really started this year covering Doge and, the effort that Elon Musk has now essentially disavowed.
That was this year? It seems like it was like a decade ago, right?
Yeah. And, along with my colleagues, Holly Otterbein and others, one of, my first big stories of the year was reporting that on inauguration weekend, before the inauguration had happened, that Vivek Ramaswamy would not co-lead Doge and was exiting Doge and was on the outs, didn't agree with Elon Musk. Elon Musk didn't like him, and he would go run for Ohio governor. And, of course, that took us in to him announcing to his launch. Then I think about spending time with, a lot of the Michigan Senate candidates, among them Mallory McMorrow, who came out and said that she would not support Chuck Schumer as leader if she were to be elected to Senate. That was, consequential news. The rise of James Talarico in Texas, spent a lot of time covering the assassination of Charlie Kirk and how that scrambled our politics and really punctuated a year where political violence became, in some ways, the norm in our discourse, in our politics. Spent a significant amount of time covering Indiana redistricting and the national redistricting wars. And of course, if you think about, I broke the story that the Texas Democratic House lawmakers would flee the state and go to Chicago to try to prevent a new map that would give Republicans 5 extra congressional seats there. I broke that story. And when they were in Illinois, they received bomb threats and moved hotels 3 times. And then you fast forward to Indiana and the redistricting wars that happened here, more than a dozen state Republican senators were threatened either with pipe bombings or, Domino pizza delivery orders as a way for, the MAGA crowd to kind of say, I know where you live, or any number of, swattings or other violent threats. And so, that's not to mention, the deaths of Melissa Hortman in Minnesota. And it's, going back to last year, Butler, Pennsylvania. So it's been a very tumultuous year in American politics. And I think when you look at the party level, both the Democratic and Republican parties are vastly transforming and changing, long-held presuppositions about everything from tariffs. Tariffs have been a significant story throughout the year in places like Michigan and the industrial Midwest. And Israel, both parties questioning this special friendship that has long defined American foreign policy. And we saw that this past weekend at the Turning Point USA AmFest, America Fest. The Republicans are questioning whether, we should have this bond with Israel. Democrats are questioning, the conflict in Gaza and how it's changed dynamics there, whether we should still be arming Israel. And so it's seismic political changes across the map.
Yeah, and we still have the war raging in Ukraine. That was not solved on day one, and that continues to impact our foreign policy, national security, the future of NATO, so many things. You summed it up, and we've seen so much almost immediate buyer's remorse and backlash against Donald Trump and the Republicans, evident in dozens of special elections, regular elections in places like Virginia, in New Jersey, Mississippi, Georgia, not exactly, considered blue bastions, and those places. How does that set the stage as we look ahead to 2026 with the people's economic anxiety that was peaked last fall in November of 2024, despite the evidence of an improving economy. People went into the voting booths last November thinking the economy was much worse than it is. And this year it has kind of manifested itself into all the bad things that were predicted and talked about in 2024, exacerbated largely by Trump's tariffs, but a lot of other factors too. Does this, at what point does it become baked? And that will be the narrative as we head into and through the election year.
Yeah, and I think one of those states that you didn't mention, or correct me if I'm wrong, is Iowa. Iowa is a red state, only one Democratic statewide office holder left, Rob Sand, who's now running for governor. But Iowa had 5 special elections this year, and 4 of them, Democrats overperformed by roughly 20 points. So something significant is happening, even in red states. There's some kind of pushback here. I spent part of the year in Iowa with former transportation secretary in South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who had a Vote Vets town hall where he met with veterans who had their benefits cut by Doge, and we went to Cedar Rapids, which is not a liberal enclave by any stretch of the imagination, and it was packed. Significantly so. And so I think in some ways the narrative is already baked in going into 2026, where we see Americans expressing in the Politico poll that we've done earlier this month that they feel that they are more strapped than they've ever been before. So, inflation, even if it's eased, and other measures of the economy, even if we're not fully getting, accurate readouts from the Bureau of Labor Statistics or the White House anymore, they have descended into kind of the American psyche in a way that does not bode well for the governing, the ruling party, the Republicans, going into the midterms next year. We don't quite see blue waves like we used to, but it is shaping up to be a difficult election for Republicans.
Adam, we talked a little bit about Turning Point, and they just finished their national meeting last weekend. Any insights that can be drawn from what happened there? I mean, they were pretty openly talking about the role of anti-Semitism and bigotry in the MAGA movement and so forth. And there was a pretty vigorous debate about that. J.D. Vance seemed to me all but said anti-Semitism is all right because it's free speech. What insights do you have based on what you saw last weekend?
I think there's a question right now in the conservative movement and the Republican Party writ large of whether it's acceptable to have any enemies to your right. In some ways it's dogma right now to not have any enemies to your right, only to the left. And so the party is embracing, views in some ways that it would have considered an anathema not too long ago. And that includes anti-Semitism. J.D. Vance is in a tight spot right now. He is peering into 2028 and seeing a coalition that is at war with itself. And, say whatever you will about President Donald Trump, but he's had a sui generis ability to unite, fractured interests in a way that few in our political history have ever been able to. I mean, you'd have to look at someone like Ronald Reagan on the right, to find a corollary. He has, patched together social conservatives, barstool conservatives, people who are more socially libertarian, fiscally conservative. He's brought in elements of kind of the fever swamps, people who may listen to Joe Rogan for their news about Epstein, the Epstein files fallout. And he's built this, big, beautiful coalition that currently is at war with itself. In a lot of ways, at the same time that we've seen this big Republican tent, we've seen a shrinking of the Democratic tent. And so Republicans are sort of asking themselves, has our coalition gotten too big? At the same time that Democrats are asking, has our coalition gotten too small? And do we need to, change policy in a way that invites, red and purple state Republicans into the fold, whether that's on issues like abortion or social issues, LGBTQ plus issues, trans sports issues. And so it's really a remarkable moment in American politics.
And we talked about the kind of this maybe the cake being baked in the economy and Trump's popularity, job approval being such a bellwether outcome of 2026, narrowing our focus to a pivotal national electoral state like Michigan, now the purplest of states. When you look at the enormity of what's on the ballot in Michigan, and I know that there's big races all across the country, especially in those key electoral vote states like Michigan, but Michigan has an open seat for governor, an open seat for Secretary of State and Attorney General, and U.S. Senate, has 3 or 4, maybe call it 3.75 frontline congressional seats. We've got battle royale due to the citizen-led redistricting reforms for the Michigan legislature. How much does national politics typically influence especially the down ballot races in a state like Michigan? When I say typically influence, and how much do we expect looking ahead to 2026 because of the Trump factor? Do we expect national politics to influence a state like Michigan at the epicenter of things like the tariff war?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one I hope to spend all of 2026 reporting in your beautiful, beautiful state, pure Michigan. And I've spent a lot of time in Michigan over the last year asking that same question, and it's interesting. Haley Stevens, the Democratic congresswoman from up there, is arguing that 2026 needs to be about Michigan issues like manufacturing, tariffs, and in some ways her competitors, Abdul El-Sayed, who's been endorsed by Bernie Sanders, and Mallory McMorrow, they're actually arguing, in some ways they're nationalizing the race. They're talking about the conflict in Israel and Palestine being a genocide by Israel, and so they're talking a little bit more about national issues. It'll be an interesting test of where the National Democratic Party should go, and I think you've seen tackings from Governor Gretchen Whitmer to the center in a way that we didn't quite see her campaign that way in 2022, and so I think it'll be a real big test of where energy in the party is at and the country's at. Can Mike Rogers win? He's got no serious primary threat right now, and in a lot of ways is locked up his own primary, but he's staring down the barrel of the tariffs issue and has said that he expects that to be resolved by the end of this year, and I'm not sure that that's the case, that's going to be the case. And so do the tariff headwinds in a state like Michigan that's manufacturing heavy, do those buffet him? I think the last time that a Republican won a Senate race in Michigan was 1992. Is that right, Joe? 94, yeah. Yeah. And so, he's got a tall task ahead of him, too.
Adam, as we talk about the political impact of national events, I'm curious your take on whether all the ongoing controversy about the Epstein files has effect. Does it motivate Democrats? Does it suppress Republican votes? And in Michigan, your take on whether Epstein plays a role here next year.
Aside from their special election victories, Democrats haven't had a lot to hang their hats on this year, 2025, in terms of dealing defeats to Trump and to MAGA. But Epstein is one of the few areas where they have done that. Ro Khanna, the congressman from California who represents Silicon Valley, has a $17 million war chest and may be running for president himself. He really figured out where the fracture might be in the MAGA movement and the coalition, and authored this discharge petition that is the reason why we're seeing a lot of these files released right now, even if they are partial releases that have been front loaded with Clinton involving former President Bill Clinton. But at the same time, the Epstein issue is such an example of partisan polarization and negative polarization, where you have Democrats who didn't care about this issue for years, and suddenly becoming interested in it because they think they can thumb their nose at Trump and embarrass him, and Republicans, people like Vivek Ramaswamy, who, made this a signature issue of his 2024 presidential campaign. He's not talking about Epstein anymore. And, candidates who made Epstein an issue for a long time are not talking about this anymore. J.D. Vance, he, famously tweeted in 2021 that reporters were not worth their weight in salt if they were not asking questions about Epstein. And, he was curiously quiet about it as the files were being released from the stage of Turning Point USA this past weekend. And so you've seen the party switch in a way that just points to negative polarization. Republicans were interested in the issue until Democrats became interested in it. Now that Democrats are interested in it, Republicans don't care. So a lot of hypocrisy to go around.
Do you think the voters care, Adam? I mean, will the Democratic or Republican voters care next year about Epstein?
It's hard to see, absent a significant revelation, that this is still going to have legs by next November. We're going to continue to see, I think, releases through the end of the year from the DOJ into early 2026, but feels like we have spent months and months litigating this issue. It's hard to think that it will be a defining issue, beyond the fact that I do think power will be on the ballot next year, and the powerful elite, the billionaires, I think there will be a reaction to that. And so to the extent that Democrats can build their argument and build Epstein into that there's a powerful elite that doesn't want you to prosper, to succeed, I think it could be an issue in that respect. But it has to be part of a larger argument unfolding next year.
Yeah, it's almost hard to imagine in this Republican Party the way that Trump has dominated everything, right down to like how often people breathe. It seems like if they're an elected Republican, that he's ever actually going to exit stage right, as you said, until he's planted on a golf course somewhere. The way he's likely, the way he has so far, frozen the J.D. Vances and Marco Rubios and Ted Cruz on the sidelines, not doing those things that aspirants to succeed him would be doing. That's going to create some awkwardness during the 2026 midterm, when typically those kinds of candidates would be out there really hustling and stumping for people, building up those chits, doing it very openly to try to succeed. They don't dare do that right now. Is that going to impact how they even campaign and try to support the Republican ticket in down ballot across the country?
It matters most eminently for 2028, when Donald Trump is no longer on the ballot. We've seen Republicans have problems getting out their voters when Trump is not on the ballot, whether it was in the New Jersey and Virginia races this year, whether it's the midterms next year, the 2018 midterms. And so when he's not on the ballot, it's a problem. There was an interesting exchange from Donald Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles, in the Explosive Vanity Fair piece that ran last week, where she essentially says that we need to figure out how to turn Trump voters into reliable Republican voters. And it's not clear that will happen. And so as the party stares down 2028, fractious moments that we're seeing at places like the Turning Point USA conference, they point to coming schisms. When Trump will be exiting stage right and no longer able to hold the coalition together. And there are big questions about whether Vance can do that. He did that in some ways this weekend at Turning Point by not picking sides. And there's going to be come a time for choosing for him. And there are going to be Republicans, people like Ted Cruz, who litigate this issue. I mean, Ted Cruz had a contentious interview with Tucker Carlson earlier this year, and Cruz is going to hold Vance's feet to the fire if he does run in 2028. And so all of this matters because it's pointing to a major crack up of the Trump coalition, after a decade and more of him leading it.
Yeah, it's almost hard to imagine in this Republican Party the way that Trump has dominated everything right down to like how often people breathe. It seems like if they're an elected Republican, that he's ever actually going to exit stage right, as you said, until he's planted on a golf course somewhere. The way he's likely, the way he has so far frozen the J.D. Vances and Marco Rubios and Ted Cruz on the sidelines, not doing those things that aspirants to succeed him would be doing. That's going to create some awkwardness during the 2026 midterm when typically those kinds of candidates would be out there really hustling and stumping for people, building up those chits, doing it very openly to try to succeed. They don't dare do that right now. Is that going to impact how they even campaign and try to support the Republican ticket in down ballot across the country?
What's really going to be interesting, Jeff, is that there's going to come a moment where Donald Trump has to endorse and make his loyalties known ahead of 2028. And the sooner that he does that, the sooner that Vance can lock up the party. But Donald Trump's interests are at odds with Vance's, because the second that Donald Trump endorses Vance, he's no longer as relevant as he once was. And so everybody knows that Donald Trump doesn't like to see the spotlight. And so those two issues, Vance's interest of locking up his endorsement and coalescing the party, and Trump's interests of being the leader of the party and having the spotlight, those are going to conflict, and they're going to conflict from now until the election day and November 28th. And it's going to be an awkward dance to watch that happen. And we're already seeing signs that Trump is kind of a lame duck candidate and a lame duck figure politically. And his party is finding ways to reject him in ways small and not so small.
Adam, what do you see for next year in terms of the Congress? Right? We've talked about the fractures in MAGA, but it seems like, Marjorie Taylor Greene leaves, Stefanik's leaving. We've got Republicans dissenting in the Congress, not as openly as perhaps they could or should. We had Congresswoman Debbie Dingell on last week, and she talked about basically government or legislation in the Congress by discharge petition. That seems to be the only way to try to get things done. What's your sense on where the Congress goes next year?
We're seeing massive exits from the Congress, and Speaker Mike Johnson's Republican majority is thinning by the day, it feels like, if not the hour. Cynthia Loomis in the Senate stepped down this past week. Elise Stefanik is not running for re-election. Johnson has a problem. He's not been able to govern. Republicans are souring on him. It feels like Congress has been ground to a halt, and it's hard to see them getting much done in a midterm election year. This was supposed to be the productive year, and we spent much of it, mired in the longest congressional shutdown ever. Yeah, I think discharge petitions are becoming, the new way to govern. We saw that with Epstein. But yeah, Congress is as dysfunctional as it's ever been, and Johnson's majority is getting less potent as the hour goes by.
Well, Adam, we promised to get you out of here on time, and we thank you very, very much for spending some time with us and enlightening our listeners with your, I think, very astute insights into national and Michigan political goings on. You know the turf here as well as anybody who covers Michigan on a day-to-day basis, and so it's always great to have your insights. Tell people we'll put it on the on our website, but tell people how to find you online other than by reading your byline at Politico.
Yeah, best place to find me and my work is on X at Adam Wren. Adam Wren like the bird.
All right. Well, Adam, thank you very much. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year. Air your grievances on Festivus Eve with gusto. wish you all the best for you and your family.
And you. Yeah.
Thanks, Adam. Great talking to you.
Thanks for having me.
That's a wrap for this year. Our great thanks to Adam Wren for his firsthand update on what he saw happening across the country during 2025 and what he expects to be covering in 2026. And a reminder, head over to our website to connect to our YouTube channel. Our website, arepublicpodcast.com. No spaces between those words.
We continue to thank you for honoring us with a few minutes of your time every week throughout this tumultuous 2025. And if the Republic is still standing after the first of the year, Jeff and I will be back to Chronicle 2026. Happy New Year.
A Republic, if you can keep it, is a copyrighted presentation of Michigan citizens for a better tomorrow.